What's up my little adult entertainers, and welcome back to a new video. After recently discovering that one of you used my business email to make a Pornhub account, I came to a realization that I'm sick of being fucked by the chaos system in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, so today I want to talk about it. And before we do start the video, I do just want to say that I don't want to have to make this video because I'm sick and tired of seeing so much negativity around Wonderlands, and I would like it to be a change of pace, which is why I was actually happy to enjoy DLC 3. But man, this is such a huge problem, and I've held off of wanting to talk about it for a while, but I'm done with it now. Now we need to talk about this. So the other day I hit Chaos 50 in Wonderlands after the new patch, up to the Chaos again, which in itself is a massive issue, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And right now what you're seeing in this gameplay is me recording gameplay for my new Deathclaw version, my new melee build. Deathclaw V2 is a build which I spent a lot of time on, and I genuinely believe it's one of, if not the strongest builds in the game, or at least it was during Chaos 35, because it could literally one-tap raid bosses. Like, legitimately, if anybody has ever used Deathclaw V2, you will know just how disgusting that build is. And what you're seeing in the gameplay is Deathclaw 3, which is the updated version of that build, and I'm playing on Intense C50 here with that same build, but basically modified to make it a lot stronger because now we have the face puncher. But why am I talking about my build? Am I trying to inflate the algorithm? No. What I'm trying to do is set you up here and give you some background on what I'm about to tell you, because this build is legitimately cracked. But even in the gameplay, you will see that I am actually struggling at Chaos 50 to take down bosses that I used to be able to one-tap. But before I go off on a tangent about how god-awful the enemy scaling is on Chaos 50, first of all, let me talk about why we're even here to begin with. When Tiny Tina's Wonderlands launched, the Chaos system capped at 20 levels. You could only go up to Chaos 20, and you had to do 20 Chaos Trials in order to get there. And the grind was significant, but the grind was rewarding because once you got to Chaos 20, you could get volatile gear, which actually felt nice to get. And you had two tiers of loot. You had chaotic gear, and you had volatile gear. Sometimes you might get non-chaotic gear, in which case you just chuck it in the trash or save it, whichever your preferred method is. And yeah, that was the loot system at launch. Now, not even a month after launch, Gearbox decided it was time to up the chaos level, going from 20 to 35. Now, all of a sudden, players reported that you no longer had to do 20 Chaos Trials to get to Chaos 20. This time you only had to do 10, earning 2 per level. But you did still have to do the extra 15 to get to Chaos 35, where you would now unlock a new tier of gear called Primordial, and you would also see increased enemy health and scaled enemy damage. Now you see, this was an incredibly puzzling decision, because Gearbox is a company who for the longest of time have gone on about how they pay close attention to their user data. Randy Pitchford literally went on stage during Borderlands 3's life cycle and said that they would not add DLC Vault Hunters because their data indicated that players didn't play them enough, which that is a whole nother situation in its own right, considering they then went to make DLC on DLC characters, but I'm getting sidetracked here. But the point here is that apparently Gearbox are very, very particular about their data, which is super bizarre, because if you looked at the PlayStation trophies for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands not even a month after launch, you would see that not even 10% of players had hit Chaos 10, and a whopping 6.1% of players had hit Chaos 20. Now, unfortunately, I don't have this same data for stuff like the Epic Games Store and Xbox, but just one platform showing that 10% of players hadn't even got halfway through your endgame levels, and you decide to up it to Chaos 35, that is a major problem for a company that supposedly pays a lot of attention to its data. Now, soon after this update went live, of course, players quickly saw what was happening. When Chaos 35 was added, enemies started to deal more damage, insta-health gating them, making their tanking builds basically useless, as we've seen in previous titles like Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 3. And additionally, weapon balance also took a massive hit, because despite players being able to get Primordial, which would be a significant boost for their gear, it still was not enough to make bad guns good, now that the enemy health had been bumped up to such a level that old guns that weren't even that great before could compete. Also, take into account that stuff like Primordial drop rates were like 1% during Chaos 35. Yeah, not a lot of people were even obtaining this gear, provided that it was doing enough to make people's builds viable on 35. And Gearbox were aware of this as well, and we know this because weeks after Chaos 35 we saw numerous buffs to various types of weapons in the game, such as SMGs and snipers. So everybody knew that Chaos 35 was basically a disaster disaster from a balance standpoint, and we needed to pump the brakes before we even considered the idea of a level cap. Now, everybody knew that Ascended was coming because Matt Cox has said in the past that there were going to be 4 tiers of this new endgame mini loot tier. So we knew that we would be getting another increase at some point, and a lot of people, including myself, knew it was going to be 50, but were hoping that Gearbox would pump the brakes and not do anything until the game was absolutely stable. Now, in the latest patch that came out with DLC 3, a bunch of buffs were delivered to spells, which was a fantastic idea because these spells in Wonderlands had been lacking for a while, with most purples being better than half of the legendaries in the game. So the buffs to the spells were incredibly important, and that would have been a great way to try and get us on a balanced playing field when Chaos 35 came around and basically ruined everything and ruined a bunch of variety. But in the weirdest turn of events, Gearbox decided that it was now time to add Chaos 50. A further 15 level increase to the Chaos system, bumping enemy health up by a whopping 800%. As it stands at Chaos 50, enemy health is sitting at around 1800% and enemy damage sitting at around plus 200%, meaning that now if you weren't already getting health gated easily before, you my friend are in luck. Now, even before Chaos 50 was achieved for my character, I was getting destroyed in the DLC, raging on stream that common mobs like goblins were basically one-tapping me, constantly downing me on just Chaos 35. And I did want to know if it was just me, maybe I was just suffering from gamer rage and it actually wasn't that big of a deal, so I made a poll on Twitter asking you guys what you thought of enemy damage. And after 1600 votes came in the span of 24 hours, a whopping 92.4% of you agreed that enemy damage is too much in Wonderlands. Now, you remember how earlier we talked about how Gearbox pays very close attention to data from the players in the game in order to help make decisions? I just have one question. If I, an absolute nobody, a cum laude at most, am able to gauge player reception from just 1600 people in a 24-hour time period on enemy damage, something as simple as enemy damage, how on earth did we go from Chaos 35 to Chaos 50 with the amount of data that we had provided to us? I do not understand this. I want to make this very clear as well as I go through this video, because I'm sure some of the higher ups are watching this. I am not trying to be toxic here. What I'm trying to do is understand. I want to understand the decision making here on Gearbox's part, because these kind of decisions harm the game. And every time that I have to look at my comment section and see another negative comment about Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, it is because of these kind of decisions. So I'm not even mad. I'm just disappointed and trying to understand why these decisions are being made. Because it isn't just enemy damage and enemy health that becomes a problem when we start doing this kind of stuff. The repercussions that constantly upping these levels have is absolutely detrimental to the health of this game. In Borderlands 3, we saw Gearbox constantly up the mayhem level to a point where they actually broke balance of the game entirely. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, most guns in the game could not compete at mayhem 10, and as a result, Gearbox had to start buffing stuff, which is a good thing. Buffing stuff up to the point where it's actually viable results in more diversity in builds and just in playstyles in general. But the issue is, amongst this gear was blue items such as the crit and the hail, 2 Moxie weapons that you could obtain at level 13 at the minimum, probably even lower than 13. But here is where this massive problem presents itself, because in order to make a gun like the crit from the Moxie tip jar viable at endgame, Gearbox hit it with a 600% buff, which did actually make it one of the strongest weapons in the game. You could take this thing into the Guardian Takedown, one of the hardest pieces of content in the game, and do work with it. The massive side effect and the huge problem that came from this, though, is that early game balance was completely shattered in two. Another example of this is the TK's Wave, which became one of the strongest shotguns in the game and the go-to for speedrunners everywhere because of just how powerful this thing could be, carrying you for like 20 levels. So you would think that after all of that, and with all of the data we have and all of the community feedback, we would have learned, but no, we are still going around in circles. Because why? Level caps or end game level caps add replayability, right? No, that is a massive misconception that has been around in the Borderlands franchise for a long time. Borderlands 1, Borderlands 2, Borderlands the pre-sequel, Borderlands 3, and now Wonderlands. It has been rampant since the very first game, and I'm here to tell you right now, a level cap has never, and I mean never, improved the state of a Borderlands game. It has only made it worse. Now, let me say first and foremost, I like level caps. I like the idea of upping the levels just because it's more to do. But I would be fooling myself and fooling you if I sat here and said to you that I confidently believe that adding a level cap actively improves the state of the game. It does not, mainly because many things balance-wise get completely shafted, and also because no one likes to refarm hundreds of pieces of gear. I do not understand where this notion of endgame level caps add replayability comes from, because in my mind it really does not. Mayhem 4 was the heyday of Borderlands 3, and you know how Borderlands 3 got ruined? By them adding Mayhem 2.0, and the exact same thing is being done here in Wonderlands, and I honestly am just so incredibly tired of it. And it's not just Gearbox, other developers are guilty of it too, but I am strictly talking about Gearbox because it pertains to the subject at hand, which is the balance in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. We need to stop mindlessly upping level caps with the thought that it adds replayability when all it does is shatters balance and breaks player morale. It needs to stop. But anyway, I'm done ranting for today. I just wanted to get on and talk with you guys because we don't do this too often. I know they say that every time, but I did just want to get on and talk to you guys about how I feel about this whole thing. So hopefully you like the video and maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I don't really care. Anyway, boys, take it easy and I'll see you in the next one.